Have you ever walked into a place only to feel judged before you even said a word? Imagine stepping into a store not as a stranger, but as the very woman who once built the company's empire, only to be treated like you didn't belong. This is the story of Marjorie Ellis, a 68-year-old grandmother, calm, dignified, and quietly powerful. She only wanted to buy a dress for her granddaughter's graduation. Instead, the store manager called the police on her. In those painful minutes, Marjorie had a choice: shrink into silence, or stand tall and remind the world who she was. What would you have done if it were you? Would you have swallowed the humiliation to avoid conflict, or faced it head-on with nothing but grace and truth? Because in just 2 minutes, this ordinary woman turned humiliation into justice. And what happened next shocked not just a store, but an entire nation. Stay with us and let this story touch you the way it has touched millions. Before we begin, please like, share, and subscribe. It helps us bring more stories of courage, dignity, and hope to life. On a mild spring afternoon in Midtown Manhattan, the sidewalks pulsed with the familiar rhythm of New York City. Taxi horns bleated, conversations mingled in the air, and shop windows glistened with new seasonal displays. Amidst the constant hum, Marjorie Ellis, a 68-year-old black woman, moved with deliberate grace. Her pace was unhurried, steady, and purposeful. She wore a cream-colored cardigan, well-worn jeans, and comfortable flats. A navy scarf framed her face, its ends fluttering slightly in the breeze. In her hand, she carried a leather handbag, scuffed at the corners, but polished from years of care. Nothing about her outfit shouted wealth or status. To most passers-by, she was simply another grandmother strolling into town on an errand. But Marjorie was not ordinary. She was the retired founder of Regency Group, the luxury retail empire whose boutiques now dotted major cities across the United States. Once heralded on the covers of business magazines, she had stepped away from the spotlight nearly a decade ago. These days, she preferred her modest apartment in Harlem, her garden of potted herbs on the balcony, and her quiet mornings reading the paper with a cup of black coffee. Today, though, she had ventured downtown with a specific mission. Her granddaughter, Danielle, was graduating high school in a few weeks. Marjorie wanted to surprise her with something timeless, a dress from Regency Boutique itself. Not because of the label, but because it carried meaning. Years ago, Marjorie had built Regency with the dream that anyone, no matter their skin color, no matter their bank account, could walk into a luxury store and be treated with dignity. She paused outside Regency Boutique on Fifth Avenue, gazing up at the sleek glass facade. A giant poster advertised the latest summer collection, featuring models in shimmering gowns. Marjorie smiled softly. The store looked different than when she first opened it, but the mission, she hoped, remained the same. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside. The boutique greeted her with hushed lighting and soft jazz piped from hidden speakers. The air carried a faint blend of sandalwood and expensive fabric. Marble floors gleamed beneath her feet. To anyone else, the scene radiated exclusivity, refinement, and quiet indulgence. To Marjorie, it was something more personal, a reminder of decades of battles fought and won. She remembered late nights drafting business plans at her kitchen table, the sting of bank officers refusing her loans, the look of doubt on investors' faces when she presented her ideas as a black woman in the 1970s. She remembered hiring her first store manager, celebrating the first profits, and the pride of cutting the ribbon at the original Midtown location. Now, years later, she entered as a customer, just a grandmother shopping for a granddaughter. Marjorie moved toward a rack of dresses near the front. Her eyes lingered on a soft lavender gown, floor-length silk, stitched with subtle silver accents. Danielle loved lavender. She reached out and brushed the fabric gently, a smile tugging at her lips. In that quiet moment, she let herself imagine Danielle stepping onto the stage in the dress, cap and gown, waiting in the wings, the audience rising to cheer. A vision of joy, a reminder of why she had worked so hard so her children and grandchildren could walk into any room without apology, without shame. The serenity, however, was fragile. Out of the corner of her eye, Marjorie noticed a shift. The conversation behind the counter had stilled. A pair of young sales associates leaned in, whispering. Their gazes flicked toward her, then away, then back again. She recognized that look. She had seen it decades earlier in boardrooms and country clubs. Suspicion, wrapped in the thin disguise of curiosity. Marjorie inhaled slowly, steadying herself. She had not come here to fight. Not today. She had come as a grandmother, not as a CEO. Yet, deep down, a familiar question stirred. Will they see me for who I am, or only for what they assume? She straightened her cardigan, lifted her chin, and turned her focus back to the lavender gown. Outside, the city's rhythm carried on. Inside, a quiet tension began to simmer, unnoticed by most, but felt keenly by the woman who had built this empire brick by brick. For now, the scene remained ordinary. But beneath the marble floors and polished smiles, the stage was already set for a confrontation that would ripple far beyond the walls of this boutique. Marjorie Ellis stood quietly in the boutique, fingertips still grazing the silk lavender gown. For a moment, she let the fabric anchor her cool, smooth, tangible. But the air behind her had shifted. Conversations that once floated like background music had slowed into hushed whispers. A pair of eyes lingered on her back longer than casual curiosity allowed. From across the sales floor, Lindsay Harper, a young sales associate with a sleek bob haircut, leaned toward the cashier. Her voice, though muted, carried just enough to be heard. Does she even know what kind of store this is? Derek Collins, manning the counter, chuckled under his breath. Cardigans and worn-out flats. My guess she's lost. Maybe thought this was the discount outlet. The words pricked Marjorie's ears. She didn't flinch, didn't turn. She had heard worse, much worse, in her lifetime. Still, a small ache spread across her chest, the ache of recognition. Bias wasn't always loud. Sometimes it whispered. Sometimes it giggled. Sometimes it came dressed as harmless banter. But the cut was just as sharp. Marjorie smoothed the sleeve of her cardigan, drawing a steadying breath. She reminded herself why she was here for Danielle. For joy, not for battle. Yet part of her wondered, even as she stood in the very store she once dreamed into existence, how quickly assumptions could eclipse truth. At the far end of the boutique, the store manager, Karen Whitfield, emerged from a glass office. Karen was in her early 40s, tall, with platinum blonde hair pulled tight into a bun that seemed to stretch her expression permanently taut. She wore a fitted black blazer, heels clicking in crisp staccato as she approached. "What's going on?" Karen asked, her eyes narrowing at Lindsay and Derek. Lindsay smirked, jerking her chin in Marjorie's direction, just keeping an eye on, well, her. Karen's gaze followed, landing squarely on Marjorie. In that moment, her eyes scanned the cardigan, the scuffed handbag, the jeans, her lips pressed thin. Marjorie turned, offering a polite smile. "Good afternoon. Could you tell me where I might find dresses in size 6? I'm shopping for my granddaughter's graduation." Karen's smile was tight, professional, but her tone carried an unmistakable edge. "Are you sure you're in the right place? Our dresses start at over $2,000. There it was, not even veiled, a declaration disguised as a question. Marjorie's smile didn't falter. "Yes, I'm sure. Thank you." Karen tilted her head slightly, studying her as though the words had not landed. After a beat, she said, "Well, the dresses you're touching are part of our couture line. They're quite delicate. Perhaps I can show you something more accessible." Lindsay snickered. Derek muffled a laugh with his hand. Marjorie let the silence hang for a moment, then replied gently, "Lavender happens to be my granddaughter's favorite color. I'd like to see this one in her size, if possible." The request was simple, polite, irrefutable. Yet Karen's brows lifted, as if Marjorie had asked for something impossible. "Of course," Karen finally said, her voice sharp as glass. She motioned for Lindsay. "Go check the back. Quickly." Lindsay disappeared through the velvet curtain toward the stockroom, though her eye roll was visible even in retreat. As Marjorie waited, she walked toward a display case of jewelry. Inside lay necklaces that glittered under the soft spotlights. She traced her gaze across the rows, remembering nights she had sat with designers, sketching ideas on napkins, fighting for collections that celebrated boldness and grace. Her reflection in the glass looked back at her silver hair, lines etched by time, eyes steady. For a fleeting second, the memory of her younger self appeared too, the 25-year-old version who had been turned away from banks, the 30-year-old who had been told investors wouldn't back a colored woman in luxury fashion. How ironic, she thought, that decades later, after building this empire, she still stood in a boutique having her worth questioned over a cardigan. The curtain rustled. Lindsay returned, holding the lavender gown draped carefully across her arms, but her expression carried annoyance, as if the task had been a waste of time. "Here," she said, offering it to Karen, not to Marjorie. Karen inspected the tag, then held it up. "This is the only one we have in a size 6. But again, I'll remind you, the price is $2,200 before tax." Marjorie nodded. "That's fine." Karen's brow arched. Derek let out an incredulous chuckle from behind the counter. "All right then," Karen said, her tone sliding from patronizing to skeptical. "Would you like to try it on yourself, or—" "It's for my granddaughter," Marjorie replied, her voice calm, unwavering. "But yes, I'd like to see it in the fitting room." Karen sighed, then gestured to Lindsay. "Take her to fitting room 3. As Marjorie followed Lindsay, the whispers didn't stop. "She doesn't look like she could buy a scarf in here," Derek muttered. "Wait till she sees the price tag and runs," Lindsay whispered back, loud enough for Marjorie to catch. Inside the fitting room, Marjorie gently hung the gown on the hook. She ran her fingers along the silk once more, her heart tightening. She wasn't naive. She knew the hostility was only beginning. But standing in the room, surrounded by mirrors, she felt something stir inside her, not just sadness, not just anger, but an old resolve. She whispered softly to herself, words her mother had once said, "Dignity is not theirs to give. It is yours to keep." Marjorie adjusted her scarf, lifted her chin, and prepared to step back out. The store might have seen only a grandmother in a cardigan, but they were about to learn they had underestimated far more than they realized. Marjorie Ellis stepped out of the fitting room with the lavender gown draped across her arm. She had not tried it on, this was never meant for her, but she wanted to see the fabric in the light, to imagine how it would fall against her granddaughter's shoulders. When she reached the mirror near the center of the boutique, a hush fell over the space. Lindsay Harper lingered nearby, arms folded across her chest, eyes rolling as if Marjorie's presence alone was an inconvenience. Derek Collins leaned lazily against the counter, tapping his fingers in mock impatience. "Are you ready to check out?" Ma'am Derek called out, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Or maybe you just wanted to play dress-up." The laughter that followed from Lindsay was sharp, brittle, and deliberate. Marjorie's chest tightened, but her expression stayed calm. "I'll be purchasing this," she replied evenly, holding the gown with care. Her words, though simple, seemed to ignite something in Karen Whitfield, the store manager, who reappeared from her office just in time to hear them. Karen walked over briskly, heels echoing across the marble floor. She stopped in front of Marjorie, gaze cold. "You'll be purchasing this. Are you certain you can afford it?" The room froze. Other shoppers glanced up from racks of handbags and displays of shoes. The air turned heavy, as if everyone sensed a line had just been crossed. "I wouldn't be standing here if I weren't," Marjorie said softly, her voice steady. Karen smirked, folding her arms. "I've worked in luxury retail for 15 years. I can tell within 30 seconds if someone belongs here, and I'll be honest, you don't." It was no longer subtle, no longer whispered. The humiliation was now public. Marjorie looked at her, eyes calm, but a quiet storm brewed beneath. She had fought this battle before, in boardrooms, in banks, in public spaces where her skin and her age had always been weighed before her words. But Karen wasn't finished. She gestured toward Derek. "Why don't you go ahead and ring her up? Let's see what card she pulls out. I'll give you $10 if it's anything more than a prepaid debit." Derek snorted, already pulling out the register drawer. "I'll take that bet." Shoppers shifted uncomfortably. A young couple near the shoe display exchanged a glance, the woman whispering, "This doesn't feel right." But no one stepped forward. Marjorie moved closer to the counter, placed the gown down gently, and reached into her handbag. She produced a slim leather wallet. Her fingers moved with composure, though her mind raced with fragments of memory, her mother being refused service at a diner, her father being asked for identification at a bank he'd deposited money in for 20 years. Karen leaned forward eagerly. "Let's see it." Marjorie pulled out a card, platinum, heavy, embossed with her name. She set it on the counter with quiet finality. Derek's eyes widened for a split second, then narrowed again, masking surprise with mockery. He held the card up, flashing it toward Lindsay. "Looks shiny. Could be fake. People buy these online. You know." Karen plucked the card from his hand and examined it. "We'll see." She tapped it against her palm, smirking at Marjorie. "You wouldn't believe how many scammers come in here dressed exactly like you, think they can blend in, snag a quick item, and walk out." Marjorie's stomach turned, but her voice stayed calm. "I came here to buy a gift for my granddaughter. Nothing more." Karen's smirk deepened. "Or maybe you came here hoping to cause a scene." She glanced toward Officer Paul Simmons, the security guard who had just entered from the side door, drawn by the raised voices. "Well, lucky for you, we handle scenes quite well." Simmons was tall, broad-shouldered, with a uniform that fit too tightly around his midsection. He looked from Karen to Marjorie, uncertainty flickering across his features. "She's attempting a purchase," Karen explained quickly, her words sharp, rehearsed. "But I believe the card is fraudulent. Better to get ahead of this before it becomes a bigger issue." Simmons frowned. "She hasn't done anything yet." Karen scoffed. "Not yet, but I know the type. Let's not wait until merchandise walks out the door." The humiliation deepened. Around the boutique, customers whispered, phones lifted discreetly to record. A narrative was being spun in real time, an elderly black woman accused of fraud in a store she had once built from nothing. Marjorie's pulse thudded in her ears. She wanted to speak, to reveal the truth right then. She could have ended it with a single sentence, "I own this chain." But she didn't. Not yet. Something inside her told her to wait, to let their words hang heavy in the air, to let them expose themselves fully. "Officer," Karen said, voice rising, "please escort her to the side while we verify the card. She's disturbing the peace of paying customers." Marjorie exhaled slowly, her dignity intact despite the storm. She gathered the lavender gown back into her arms, her grip gentle, protective, as though shielding it from the ugliness around her. She looked at Simmons and said, "I will stand wherever you ask me to, but I will not be spoken to as if I am less than human." The words quieted the room. Even Lindsay hesitated, her smirk faltering. Karen, however, pressed harder, sensing her authority questioned. "This is my store, my rules. If you can't comply, you'll be removed." Marjorie locked eyes with her, unblinking. The storm inside her had shifted, now less anger, more resolve. She could feel the weight of history pressing against her spine, urging her not to bend. Outside, the city carried on, oblivious. Inside, the boutique had become a stage for humiliation. The curtain had lifted. The roles were cast. And Marjorie Ellis, though dressed like any ordinary grandmother, was about to deliver a lesson that would echo far beyond these marble floors. The lavender gown still rested in Marjorie Ellis's arms as if it were fragile porcelain. The store, however, was anything but delicate. Tension crackled in the air, sharp and visible. Karen Whitfield crossed her arms tightly, her jaw clenched. She was no longer whispering, no longer hiding behind insinuations. Now her voice rang out across the boutique, designed to draw the attention of every shopper within earshot. "This woman," Karen announced, pointing toward Marjorie, "is attempting to purchase merchandise with what I strongly suspect is a fraudulent card. We cannot and will not allow scams in this store." Gasps fluttered through the boutique. A couple by the shoe display froze mid-conversation. A mother tugged her child closer to her side. Two college students near the handbags lifted their phones higher, cameras recording every word. Marjorie stood still, her back straight, her gaze calm. She did not try to defend herself yet. Her silence was deliberate, controlled, as if she knew something no one else did. Officer Paul Simmons shifted uncomfortably. "Karen." "She hasn't," Karen cut him off. "Officer, it's your job to maintain security. Do I need to call the NYPD myself, or will you remove her?" Paul hesitated, his brow furrowed. He looked at Marjorie, then at the gawking crowd. The weight of the moment pressed on him. "Call them," Karen snapped. "If we let her stay, we'll regret it." Derek Collins smirked from behind the counter. "Maybe the cops can take her back to wherever she came from." Lindsay Harper laughed too loudly, the kind of laugh meant to show allegiance. Karen pulled her phone from her blazer pocket and dialed. Her voice turned syrupy sweet as the dispatcher answered. "Yes, this is the manager at Regency Boutique on Fifth Avenue. We have an elderly woman here, suspicious behavior. Possible fraud. She's refusing to leave. Could you send officers immediately?" Refusing to leave. Marjorie's lips parted slightly at the words. She had not refused. She had stood quietly, gown in hand, her voice calm. Yet now she was being painted as defiant, disruptive, dangerous. Karen slid the phone back into her pocket, lips curling into a smug smile. "They'll be here in minutes. Let's see what story you tell them." "Ma'am." Marjorie inhaled deeply. Inside her chest, anger and grief swirled together, but she held steady. She could almost hear her late husband's voice. "Choose your moment, Marjorie. Don't waste it too soon." She adjusted the scarf at her neck, her posture regal, unshaken. She would not give Karen the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. The boutique buzzed with whispers now, the kind that pricked at the skin. Some customers shook their heads in disapproval. Others leaned in, eager for spectacle. "Unbelievable," one man muttered near the handbags, profiling her right in the open. Another woman whispered to her friend, "Why doesn't someone step in?" But no one did. Not yet. Minutes crawled by until the faint wail of sirens seeped through the glass storefront. Red and blue lights splashed against the marble floor as two NYPD officers stepped inside. Their presence silenced the boutique instantly. Karen strode forward, her heels striking the tile like a gavel. "Thank goodness you're here," she said breathlessly. "This woman has been causing a disturbance. I believe she's attempting to use a stolen credit card. She refuses to leave when asked." One of the officers, a tall man with graying temples, looked at Marjorie. His eyes softened slightly at the sight of her small frame, her cardigan, her dignified stance. "Ma'am, can we see some identification?" Marjorie nodded, reaching calmly into her bag. She pulled out her driver's license, along with the same platinum card Karen had mocked earlier. She handed both over without a word. The officer studied them, frowning. He glanced at his partner. "This card is in her name. License matches." Karen's voice sharpened. "Anyone can print a name on plastic. She doesn't belong here. Look at her. Do you honestly believe she can afford a dress that costs more than her rent?" The cruelty in the statement sliced through the room. Even Paul Simmons flinched. The officer handed the license and card back to Marjorie. "Everything checks out. Ma'am, you're free to shop." Karen's face flushed. "Excuse me, you're just going to let her continue. She hasn't broken any laws," the officer replied firmly. "We're not removing someone who hasn't done anything wrong." The tension spiked. Karen's lips trembled with rage. "This is my store. If she won't leave, then I'll escalate this to corporate myself." Marjorie met her eyes finally, voice soft but carrying. "Perhaps you should." Karen's jaw tightened. She turned back to the officers. "If something goes missing, you'll be responsible." The older officer sighed. "Ma'am, she has every right to be here. Unless you want to file a false report, which is a crime, I suggest you let her be." The crowd stirred. Murmurs rippled. Phones captured every angle. The narrative had shifted slightly, but Karen refused to back down. "Officer Simmons." Karen barked. "Escort her outside. Store policy gives me authority to refuse service." Paul looked at Marjorie again, then at the gown in her arms. He swallowed hard. "Karen, maybe we should just let her do it," Karen snapped. Marjorie's eyes locked on Paul's. Her voice was calm, resolute. "You have to decide whose orders you serve today, justice or prejudice." Paul froze, caught between loyalty to his manager and the weight of her words. Outside, the sirens faded. Inside, the boutique was a powder keg, seconds away from igniting. Marjorie Ellis stood alone at the center, lavender gown against her chest, the embodiment of quiet defiance. She had not yet revealed her identity, but her restraint, her dignity, her silence spoke louder than any outburst could. The store had set the stage for her humiliation. What they didn't know was that the next act would not belong to them. The lavender gown rested lightly in Marjorie Ellis's arms, but her heart carried a weight that seemed unbearable. The confrontation with Karen Whitfield, the sting of Derek Collins' smirk, the hollow echo of Lindsay Harper's laughter, all of it pressed into her chest like stones. The NYPD officers had left. Their verdict simple and factual. Marjorie had broken no laws. Yet the humiliation lingered. The damage wasn't about legality. It was about dignity. Marjorie moved slowly toward a corner chair, her hand brushing the polished glass counter as she lowered herself onto the seat. She folded the gown carefully across her lap, as if cradling something fragile, as if cradling a piece of herself. Her eyes drifted upward to the store's glowing chandeliers. For a fleeting moment, they reminded her of a ballroom from decades past. She could still hear the orchestra, feel the silk gloves, and remember the way her late husband, Charles, would whisper, "You belong everywhere you walk, Marjorie. Never let them make you believe otherwise. The memory stung. Charles had been her anchor. Together, they had built Regency Group from nothing late nights. Small contracts, relentless work. They had turned grit into elegance, a kitchen table dream into a national enterprise. Yet here she was, in one of her own flagship stores, treated as an intruder. She let out a slow breath. The younger version of herself, the one who fought tooth and nail in boardrooms, filled with men who dismissed her, would have erupted by now. She would have slammed her credentials on the counter, demanded respect, demanded acknowledgement, but 68 years of living had tempered her fire into something quieter, deeper. She understood now that power wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was patient. Sometimes it was choosing when to speak, not just what to say. Her hands trembled slightly. She pressed them together to still the shaking. Inside her, two voices wrestled. One whispered, "Reveal yourself now. Show them who you are. Strip away their ignorance before it grows further." The other murmured, "Wait. Let them reveal themselves fully. Let their prejudice run unchecked so that when the truth comes, there is no doubt, no excuse, no escape." Marjorie closed her eyes. She saw Danielle's face, her granddaughter's bright smile, her fierce curiosity. Danielle looked at the world with fresh hope, with an innocence Marjorie desperately wanted to protect. But what lesson would today's humiliation teach her? That dignity could be trampled in public. That age and race could erase decades of accomplishment. No, Marjorie thought firmly. Today must teach Danielle something else, something enduring. Karen's voice rang out again, sharp and grating. "You can sit there all you like, but once corporate gets my report, you'll be banned from every store in the chain." Marjorie didn't flinch. She held her silence, letting Karen's words hang in the air like sour smoke. Around her, shoppers whispered louder now. Phones were still raised. The story was writing itself on dozens of screens. Her mind drifted to a memory she had tried to bury. 40 years ago, in a tiny bank office uptown, she had been told she was too risky for a business loan. She remembered the smirk of the loan officer, the way he leaned back in his chair and said, "Maybe if you had a partner we could trust." She remembered the fire that ignited in her then, the fire that fueled her climb. That same fire stirred now, but it was no longer reckless. It was measured, seasoned. She opened her purse and slipped her fingers along the worn leather journal she carried everywhere. Inside were scribbled notes, reminders, quotes she loved. She flipped to one page without looking. Her eyes fell on words she had written years ago. Strength isn't about how loud you speak. It's about how long your silence unsettles the room. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. Paul Simmons, the security guard, approached cautiously. His voice was low, almost apologetic. "Ma'am, if I may, I don't think this is right, but Karen's my boss. I have to." He trailed off, shame coloring his face. Marjorie studied him. There was hesitation in his eyes, but also something else, regret. She saw a man torn, caught between obedience and conscience. "You have to decide," she said softly, echoing her earlier words. "Decide what story you'll tell your children about the day you stood by or the day you stood up." Paul swallowed hard, then stepped back. He didn't move to escort her. His silence was its own answer. Marjorie leaned back in the chair, her thoughts spiraling. Should she call Rebecca Lawson now? One phone call, and the entire boutique would shift. Karen would crumble. Derek's smirk would vanish. The balance of power would swing so violently that the shock might fracture the room. But was now the moment? Or was it still too soon? Her fingers lingered over her phone. She imagined dialing Rebecca's number, imagined the hush that would fall when the truth spilled out. Yet she also imagined Danielle's eyes, watching carefully, absorbing every choice. This wasn't just about her pride. This was about the lesson her granddaughter and everyone else in the store would carry forward. She chose patience. Karen stormed closer, her perfume sharp in the air. You think sitting there quiet makes you innocent? You're just waiting, aren't you? Waiting for me to slip. Well, I won't. I know your type. Always pretending to be something you're not. Marjorie looked up at her, eyes calm, voice quiet. You don't know me at all. The words weren't loud, but they cut through the boutique like glass. For a moment, even Karen faltered, unnerved by the weight behind them. Derek chuckled nervously, trying to break the tension. This is ridiculous. I mean, what's next? She says she owns the place. Laughter sputtered from Lindsay, brittle and forced. But in that instant, Marjorie's decision crystallized. She would not reveal herself yet. She would let them keep digging, let the spectacle grow, let the cameras capture every cruel word. The truth, when it came, would land heavier than any immediate defense could. Her chest ached, but not from fear, from resolve. She smoothed the lavender gown once more and whispered so softly only she could hear. Patience, Charles. Just a little longer. The boutique buzzed again, louder this time, as shoppers debated openly. Some muttered support for her. Others avoided eye contact, afraid of involvement. Marjorie sat still, the storm around her gathering force. Inside, her heart pounded with the rhythm of restraint and anticipation. She was a woman forged in battles far harsher than this boutique. And though her silence seemed passive, it was the silence of a chess player waiting for the perfect move. The game was far from over. The boutique no longer hummed with the gentle soundtrack of soft jazz and murmured shopping chatter. Instead, it vibrated with unease. Conversations had stopped. Every eye was fixed on the corner where Marjorie Ellis sat with the lavender gown folded across her lap. Karen Whitfield stood stiff, arms crossed, her lips pressed into a thin line. Her phone call to the NYPD hadn't brought the resolution she wanted. The officers had left unconvinced, refusing to remove Marjorie. That left Karen with only one weapon, her authority inside the store. But Marjorie's calm defiance was like sand slipping through Karen's clenched fists. Brian Karen barked. The assistant manager emerged from the back room, his tie loosened, expression smug. Brian Turner had a reputation for siding with Karen, no matter how outrageous her commands were. To him, authority was not something to question, but something to wield like a club. "What's going on?" Brian asked, though the grin on his face suggested he already knew. Karen gestured toward Marjorie. "This woman refuses to leave. She's been disruptive, possibly fraudulent, and she's undermining store policy. I want her escorted out." Brian's gaze swept over Marjorie, pausing at her cardigan, her age, her steady eyes. "Looks like she's just sitting there to me." "She's not just sitting," Karen snapped. "She's challenging me. In my store." Brian smirked and cracked his knuckles as if this were some schoolyard standoff. "All right, ma'am," he said, striding toward Marjorie. "You heard the boss. Time to go." Marjorie didn't move. Her voice was calm, almost tender. "I will leave when I decide to leave. Not a moment sooner." The quiet power in her words made Brian pause. His smirk faltered. He wasn't used to being answered like that. Karen's eyes flashed. "Brian, don't just stand there. Do your job." Shoppers shifted uneasily. A young woman by the jewelry counter raised her phone higher, recording in silence. An older gentleman near the entrance muttered, "This is going too far." Brian reached for Marjorie's arm, but Officer Paul Simmons stepped forward quickly. "Don't," Paul warned, his voice low but firm. "She hasn't done anything wrong." Karen spun toward him. "Paul, you're security. You follow my orders. If you won't do it, then Brian will." Marjorie raised her eyes to Brian. Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow filled the room. "Young man, before you lay a hand on me, think carefully. What you do in this moment will follow you for the rest of your life." Brian froze. His hand hovered inches from her sleeve. Something in her gaze unsettled him, though he didn't want to admit it. Derek Collins, from behind the counter, chuckled nervously. "Oh, come on, Brian, don't let her spook you. She's just some old lady making a scene." Lindsay Harper giggled, though the sound was forced. Brittle. Even she could sense the atmosphere turning. Karen stomped closer, heels striking the marble. "If none of you have the backbone to enforce policy, then I'll do it myself." She bent down, grabbing for the lavender gown in Marjorie's lap. But Marjorie's hands tightened around the fabric with surprising strength. Their eyes met, one pair burning with rage, the other steady as stone. "You will not take this from me?" Marjorie said, her tone sharp enough to slice through the air. The crowd gasped. A ripple of voices filled the room. Someone muttered, "She has every right to buy it." Another said, "This is humiliating. Why are they treating her like this for the first time?" Customers weren't just whispering. They were speaking openly. A middle-aged woman near the perfume counter raised her voice. "She hasn't done anything wrong. Why are you harassing her?" Karen whipped her head around. "This is none of your concern. Please continue shopping." But the spell had broken. A college student near the handbags called out, "I've been filming since it started. Everyone online will see exactly what's happening here." Karen's face paled for the briefest second before anger colored it again. "Film all you want," she snapped. "Corporate will back me." Brian glanced at the phones pointed their way, his confidence faltering. "Karen, maybe we should just—" "Enough," Karen shouted. Her voice cracked, and it was no longer the voice of control, but of desperation. "This woman does not belong here. I don't care what it takes." She leaves now. The store erupted in murmurs, the atmosphere thick with outrage and disbelief. Marjorie lifted her chin, her heart pounded in her chest, but her face betrayed nothing. She thought of Charles again, his voice in her memory. "Don't waste your strength too soon. Wait for the moment when it matters most." Paul Simmons stepped fully in front of her now, planting himself like a shield. His decision was clear. "She's staying. If you fire me for it, so be it." The silence that followed was electric. For the first time, Karen's authority cracked. "You're making a mistake." "Paul," Karen hissed. "No," he said firmly. "You are." Every phone in the room was recording. Every customer leaned forward, drawn into the unfolding drama. Marjorie's heart ached with both sorrow and resolve. This was the breaking point, the moment where cruelty and resistance collided. Soon, she knew, the truth would have to come out, but not yet, not until Karen and Brian had fully revealed who they were. She let her eyes sweep the room, catching Danielle's worried gaze through the store window outside. The girl pressed her hands to the glass, her lips forming words Marjorie couldn't hear, but could feel. "Stay strong. Grandma." Marjorie closed her eyes for a beat, inhaling deeply. When she opened them again, her silence was no longer heavy. It was thunder waiting to strike. And the entire boutique held its breath, sensing that thunder was about to fall. The boutique had become a stage, and every shopper an unwilling witness. Phones hovered high like glowing lanterns. The air was thick with anticipation, as if everyone sensed that something monumental was about to happen. Marjorie Ellis sat still, lavender gown draped across her lap, her back straight as an oak. She could feel every beat of her heart, steady but strong, like a drum calling her toward the inevitable. She had waited long enough. Karen Whitfield paced like a lioness circling prey. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes wild. Enough of this circus. She snapped, "Brian, call corporate right now. I want her banned, effective immediately." Brian Turner hesitated, glancing at the sea of phones pointed in their direction. He swallowed hard, then pulled out his phone reluctantly. His thumb hovered over the screen, but his eyes flicked nervously toward Marjorie. Paul Simmons stood nearby, arms crossed, jaw tight. He was no longer Karen's guard dog. He was a silent witness who had made his choice. Marjorie rose slowly from her chair. The fabric of the gown shimmered under the chandelier as if it carried its own light. Her movement commanded silence. Conversations hushed. Even Karen froze mid-step, thrown off balance by the quiet authority radiating from the elderly woman before her. Marjorie's voice was calm, but it carried like a bell. "I have sat here patiently while you paraded your prejudice for all to see. I have endured your accusations, your insults, your threats, and yet, through it all, I have remained silent, not because I am weak, but because I wanted you to reveal who you truly are." Her words sliced through the boutique. The customers leaned forward, their phones trembling in their hands. Karen let out a sharp laugh, but it rang hollow. "What could you possibly reveal? That you've been humiliated, that you tried to scam your way into buying something you can't afford." Marjorie looked at her steadily. "No. That this store, this entire chain exists because of me." The boutique erupted in gasps. Karen blinked, stunned. What Marjorie reached into her purse and drew out a slim leather card holder. From it, she pulled a business card embossed with gold lettering. She held it out, not with arrogance, but with calm finality. Karen snatched it and read aloud, her voice faltering as the words cut her tongue. Marjorie Ellis, founder and former CEO, Regency Group. Her face drained of color. Marjorie continued, her voice unwavering. "Yes, I built this company. Every chandelier above your head, every rack of dresses, every counter in this store was born from decades of my labor. I signed the first lease. I hired the first staff, and I fought to bring dignity into every corner of this business. And yet here I stand, in my own creation, treated as though I were a thief." The silence was deafening. Phones captured every flicker of expression, the disbelief on Brian's face, the shame creeping over Lindsay, the sickly pallor of Derek, and the growing fury in Karen's eyes. "You're lying," Karen stammered, though her voice lacked conviction. "If you were really who you say you are, why would you be here dressed like this?" Marjorie tilted her head slightly. "Because true power doesn't need to announce itself with sequins and noise. Because I do not come here as a queen demanding worship. I come here as a woman, a customer, deserving of the same respect as anyone else." The crowd murmured in agreement. A man near the shoes called out, "She doesn't owe you an explanation." Karen's hands trembled as she shoved the card back at Marjorie. "This proves nothing. Corporate already knows who I am," Marjorie interrupted gently. She reached for her phone and pressed a single button. Her call went directly to a saved contact. The line picked up almost immediately. "Rebecca Lawson speaking," came the crisp voice of the regional director. Marjorie put the call on speaker. Her voice was soft but deliberate. "Rebecca, I'm at the Midtown Boutique. I've just been publicly accused of fraud and nearly removed by your staff. Would you like to explain this to me, or shall I handle it myself?" The room held its breath. On the other end, Rebecca's voice faltered with shock. "Ms. Ellis, oh my God. Please don't do anything yet. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Karen's mouth opened and closed, no sound emerging. Brian's phone slipped from his hand, clattering onto the floor. Marjorie ended the call and placed her phone gently back into her purse. She turned toward Karen, her eyes sharp but not cruel. You wanted corporate. Now you will have corporate. The boutique buzzed with a new kind of energy now, not the tension of prejudice, but the electricity of revelation. The customers whispered furiously, their phones capturing every word. The tide had turned. Karen stumbled back, muttering, "This isn't happening. This can't be happening." Marjorie stepped forward, lavender gown still in her grasp. Her voice softened, almost mournful. "It is happening, Karen, and the tragedy is not that you tried to humiliate me. The tragedy is that you revealed the sickness at the heart of how you see people. That sickness, if left unchecked, destroys not only dignity, but the very foundation of this company I built." Her words echoed like a sermon, reverberating off the marble walls. Some customers had tears in their eyes. Paul Simmons lowered his head, his voice thick. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I should have done more." Marjorie touched his arm lightly. "You did enough. You chose conscience when it mattered." The doors swung open with a whoosh, and a new murmur rippled through the crowd. Rebecca Lawson had arrived. She strode in briskly, her heels echoing, her eyes wide as she took in the scene, the cameras, the stunned employees, and Marjorie Ellis, standing tall, with quiet authority. "Ms. Ellis," Rebecca breathed, rushing forward, "I cannot express how deeply ashamed I am that you were subjected to this." Karen's face twisted. "Rebecca, wait." Rebecca raised a hand, silencing her. "Karen, not another word. Do you understand what you've done?" The boutique braced for what was to come. The boutique felt like it had been struck by a storm. The chandeliers above still glittered, but their light seemed harsher now, throwing sharp shadows across every face. Phones hovered in the air like dozens of unblinking eyes, catching every tremor, every word. Rebecca Lawson stepped fully into the store, her presence commanding in a way Karen Whitfield could never replicate. Her tailored suit was crisp, her posture unshakable. She had been with Regency Group for nearly 15 years, long enough to know its history, long enough to understand the weight of the name Marjorie Ellis. "Ms. Ellis," Rebecca said again, her voice carrying both reverence and urgency. "I am so sorry. This should never have happened." Marjorie inclined her head slightly. Her face was calm, but her eyes burned with quiet intensity. She did not need to shout. Her silence spoke louder than Karen's fury ever could. Karen stepped forward quickly, desperation leaking into her tone. "Rebecca, please, you don't understand. This woman, she came in acting suspicious." Rebecca's gaze snapped toward her, icy and unyielding. "Stop! Right there!" The entire boutique froze. Even the air seemed to halt. "Do you realize who you just humiliated?" Rebecca's voice rose, clipped and deliberate. "You accused the founder of this company of fraud. You attempted to have her removed by police. You paraded your prejudice in front of every customer in this store." Karen's mouth opened, then closed again. Her face flushed crimson, her hands trembling at her sides. Brian Turner, who had lingered near the counter, took a nervous step back. "I was just following orders," he muttered, though his words barely carried. Rebecca's sharp eyes landed on him. "And you thought those orders excused cruelty, excused threatening a woman who has done nothing wrong." Brian swallowed hard, but he didn't reply. Marjorie finally broke her silence. Her voice was low, steady, filled with both sorrow and resolve. "This isn't just about me. Rebecca, today I stood here as one woman, But how many others have faced this treatment without the ability to defend themselves? How many walked into this store and were turned into suspects because of their skin, their age, their clothes? The weight of her words hung in the air, pressing on every soul in the boutique. Rebecca nodded slowly, her expression grim. "You're right, and it ends here." She turned back to Karen, her tone sharp enough to cut. "Karen Whitfield, effective immediately. You are relieved of your position as store manager. You will leave this boutique right now." The crowd gasped. Lindsay Harper dropped the stack of folded blouses in her hands. Derek Collins cursed under his breath. Karen's voice cracked. "You can't fire me. You don't have the authority." Only corporate Rebecca straightened to her full height. "I am corporate. As regional director, I oversee 12 stores in this district, and let me be very clear, you are done here." Karen's lips trembled, rage warring with disbelief. She looked around, desperately, searching for support, but the customers' eyes burned with judgment. Phones continued to film. Even her own staff avoided her gaze. She turned toward Marjorie, her voice shaking. "You planned this, didn't you? You came in here dressed like that just to trap me." Marjorie shook her head gently. "No." "I came here to buy a gown. You created the trap all on your own." The words struck like a hammer. Rebecca's gaze shifted to Brian. "And as for you, assistant manager or not, you enabled this. You stood ready to put your hands on Ms. Ellis. You laughed while your colleagues mocked her. Your position here is also terminated." Brian's face blanched. "Wait, please, I need this job." I didn't mean you meant exactly what you did," Rebecca said sharply. "And now you will answer for it." Brian's shoulders slumped. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of accountability. The customers erupted in whispers. Some clapped quietly, unable to contain their approval. Others shook their heads in disbelief at the spectacle unfolding before them. Karen, humiliated and furious, tried one last desperate attempt. "You can't just throw me out in front of everyone. You'll ruin me." Marjorie's eyes met hers, steady and unwavering. "You ruined yourself the moment you chose to see me as less than human." The sentence landed like a final verdict. Rebecca gestured toward the door. "Security, please escort Ms. Whitfield and Mr. Turner out." Paul Simmons stepped forward, his expression conflicted but resolute. He had once taken Karen's orders without question, but not anymore. He motioned firmly toward the exit. "This way." Karen jerked her arm free. "Don't touch me." She stormed toward the door, her heels striking the floor like gunshots. Brian trailed behind, his head hung low, his face pale. As the glass doors swung shut behind them, the boutique exhaled collectively. The storm had passed, but the air still trembled with its aftermath. Rebecca turned back to Marjorie, her expression softening. "Ms. Ellis, I promise you this, there will be a full investigation. Every employee in this store, in this district, will undergo training. This kind of disgrace will never happen again." Marjorie held her gaze. "Promises are words. Rebecca, what matters is action. I built this company to be a place of dignity. If it can no longer be that, then it does not deserve to exist." Rebecca nodded solemnly. "Then we will make it worthy again." The customers broke into applause. It wasn't loud or chaotic, but it was steady, heartfelt. Phones captured every moment. Already, the story was leaving the walls of the boutique, spreading outward, unstoppable. Marjorie stood quietly amid the sound, her heart heavy but her spirit steady. She hadn't asked for this confrontation, but she had not shied away from it either. And though the scars of the day would linger, so too would the lesson. Rebecca leaned closer. "Would you like me to arrange a car, Ms. Ellis?" Marjorie shook her head, a faint smile touching her lips. "No, I'll walk." Sometimes it's important to be seen. Rebecca bowed her head slightly in respect. As you wish. And with that, the confrontation ended. But its ripples had only just begun. The doors closed behind Karen Whitfield and Brian Turner with a final, echoing thud. For a long, suspended moment, the boutique was utterly silent. The chandeliers hummed faintly above, but no one moved. No one breathed too loudly. It was as if the entire store had been holding its breath, waiting to see what Marjorie Ellis would do next. Then, slowly, the sound began to shift. First a single clap, hesitant but firm, from the older gentleman near the entrance. Then another, from the young woman by the jewelry counter. Within seconds, the boutique erupted in applause, steady, respectful, not wild, but purposeful. The customers weren't celebrating scandal. They were acknowledging justice. Marjorie didn't bask in it. She simply stood, lavender gown still cradled in her arms, her eyes soft but steady. She let the applause wash over her like rain cleansing, humbling, bittersweet. Rebecca Lawson waited for the noise to ebb before stepping forward. "Ms. Ellis," she said, her voice reverent, "would you like us to clear the store? Give you some privacy?" Marjorie shook her head gently. "No, let them stay. Let them see." She turned to the customers, her voice warm but deliberate. "You've all witnessed something today. Something ugly. Yes, but also something necessary. Prejudice hides in quiet corners until it's dragged into the light. You recorded it. You saw it with your own eyes. Don't erase it. Don't look away. Remember it, and choose differently when the choice is yours." A murmur of assent rippled through the crowd. Some lowered their phones, no longer seeing the need to film. Others kept recording, but now their eyes carried respect instead of curiosity. Lindsay Harper, who had been silent since the firings, finally stepped forward, her hands twisting nervously. "Ms. Ellis," she said, her voice cracking, I laughed earlier. I didn't stop them." Marjorie raised a hand gently. "You joined in because it was easier than standing apart. That doesn't make you irredeemable, Lindsay. It makes you human. But now you must choose what kind of human you'll be tomorrow." Tears pricked Lindsay's eyes. She nodded quickly, whispering, "I will. I promise." Derek Collins cleared his throat from behind the counter, his bravado long gone. I shouldn't have joked. It wasn't funny. I don't know what came over me." Marjorie's gaze rested on him, unblinking. "What came over you was comfort, the comfort of cruelty disguised as humor. You can't undo what you said, but you can decide never to let that comfort take hold of you again." Derek lowered his head, shame coloring his face. For once, he had nothing to say. Paul Simmons, the security guard, stood tall now, his earlier hesitation replaced with quiet conviction. "Ma'am, if you ever wonder whether your words reached anyone, know they reached me. I almost followed orders I knew were wrong. I won't make that mistake again." Marjorie smiled faintly. "That's all any of us can do. Officer Simmons, learn and change." The boutique grew quiet again, but this time it was a reverent silence, the kind that fills a church after prayer. Customers exchanged looks heavy with thought. The spectacle was over, but its meaning lingered in the air like incense. Rebecca stepped closer. "Ms. Ellis, what would you like us to do now? We can close the store, issue an immediate statement, begin retraining." Marjorie lifted the gown in her arms, brushing its fabric gently with her fingertips. "First," she said softly, "I would like to purchase this dress, not because I need it, but because I refuse to let anyone take away the dignity of my choice." Rebecca's eyes softened. Of course. She gestured to Derek, who hurried over to ring up the sale. His hands trembled as he slid the gown into a protective bag. When Marjorie handed him her platinum card, he accepted it silently, his earlier smirk replaced with humility. As the receipt printed, Marjorie turned back to the customers. When you leave here, you'll tell this story. Some will say it was about an old woman buying a dress. Some will say it was about racism in a boutique. But I hope you'll remember it as something larger, a reminder that dignity is not given by a title or a price tag. It is something every human being carries, and something no one has the right to strip away. Her words drew nods, murmurs, even quiet tears. One young man, barely out of college, raised his voice. Ms. Ellis, can I share your words online? She smiled gently. Share what you saw. The truth will speak for itself. Derek returned with the bagged gown, setting it on the counter with care. Marjorie accepted it, her hand steady. She turned to Rebecca, her expression both soft and firm. You have work to do, Rebecca. Today was not an isolated failure. It was a symptom. Train them, watch them, hold them accountable. Otherwise, the company we built is nothing more than glass and fabric. Rebecca nodded solemnly. I give you my word, there will be change. Marjorie inclined her head, then began walking slowly toward the exit. Customers stepped aside instinctively, forming a quiet path. Some reached out to touch her arm lightly, as if hoping to borrow a fragment of her strength. Others simply bowed their heads in silent respect. As she neared the glass doors, Danielle rushed in, her eyes wide with relief. Grandma, she cried, throwing her arms around Marjorie. Marjorie held her close, whispering softly, It's all right, my love, it's over. But deep inside, she knew it wasn't over. The moment she stepped into the street, the story would spread. The videos would flood the internet. The world would know what had happened here, and the weight of that truth would not be easily contained. Rebecca lingered near the counter, already pulling out her phone to alert headquarters. Lindsay wiped her tears quietly. Derek stared at the floor, his shame unrelenting. Paul stood tall, watching Marjorie go with a newfound resolve. And the customers, they walked out into the streets of Manhattan, carrying more than shopping bags. They carried a story that would ripple outward, touching strangers, sparking conversations, igniting change. The boutique would never be the same. Neither would they. The following morning, the streets of Manhattan were already buzzing with their usual rhythm taxis honking, street vendors calling out, and pedestrians weaving through the sidewalks with coffee cups in hand. But inside countless apartments, offices, and coffee shops, people weren't talking about traffic or the weather. They were talking about a video. A young woman named Claire Henderson, one of the boutique customers who had filmed the entire incident, had uploaded her recording to social media just after leaving the store. By dawn, it had been shared over 2 million times. The title she gave it was simple, but cutting: Elderly Black Woman Humiliated at Prestige Boutique. But watch what happens next. The first 30 seconds showed Karen Whitfield and Brian Turner standing stiffly, their voices sharp, their faces set with disdain as they accused Marjorie Ellis of trespassing. Viewers could hear the gasps of other customers in the background. Then came the turning point, Marjorie's quiet but commanding voice, her calm refusal to shrink, her phone call that summoned Rebecca Lawson, and the abrupt firings that followed. It wasn't just a confrontation, it was a story with a beginning, middle, and explosive end. A humiliation turned into a reckoning. By mid-morning, hashtags began trending, or Marjorie Ellis, Prestige Boutique, Dignity, Has No Price. Comments poured in. This broke my heart. That woman is Grace under fire. I can't believe this is still happening in 2025. Prestige Boutique better fix this fast, or they're done. She reminded me of my grandmother, strong, calm, unshakable. On TikTok, reaction videos multiplied. Some creators stitched the original clip, pausing to highlight the expressions of bystanders, the trembling in Lindsay Harper's voice, the shame that overtook Derek Collins. Others replayed Marjorie's line. Dignity is not given by a title or a price tag, setting it against music, turning her words into a rallying cry. Within hours, national news outlets picked it up. Morning anchors debated the implications over coffee mugs, their tones a blend of outrage and awe. Cable networks ran the clip on repeat. Journalists framed it as another chapter in America's ongoing struggle with racial prejudice, except this time, the ending had flipped the script. Marjorie herself remained quiet. She stayed home in her brownstone on the Upper West Side, her phone buzzing endlessly with messages from friends, former colleagues, and even strangers. Danielle scrolled through the comments with wide eyes. "Grandma, do you realize you're trending worldwide?" Marjorie chuckled softly, sipping her tea. "The world doesn't need me trending, child. It needs to hear the truth. That's all." Meanwhile, at the corporate headquarters of Regency Group, chaos unfolded. Emails poured in by the thousands, many from outraged customers vowing to boycott. Investors demanded explanations. The company's stock price dipped nearly 7 points before noon. Rebecca Lawson, still reeling from the night before, found herself thrust into the spotlight. Reporters gathered outside her office, microphones extended, demanding answers. What steps are you taking? Will the company issue an apology? Is this reflective of larger systemic issues inside Prestige? At 2 p.m., Regency's CEO, Alan Whitmore, convened an emergency board meeting. Executives sat around a polished mahogany table, their faces pale, their laptops glowing with real-time analytics of the public backlash. Alan rubbed his temples. "This is a disaster," he muttered. "We're hemorrhaging trust. Karen Whitfield and Brian Turner are gone, yes, but people want more than firings. They want accountability." One board member cleared her throat nervously. "We could release a standard apology statement. Condemn discrimination. Emphasize that the individuals acted alone." Rebecca cut her off. "No, that won't work. People saw this with their own eyes. They saw the culture inside that boutique. An apology without real change is an insult." Alan scowled. "So what are you suggesting, Rebecca?" She met his gaze steadily. "I suggest we listen to Ms. Ellis. She gave us a roadmap last night. Accountability, training, cultural change. If we ignore her, we'll not only lose customers, we'll lose the soul of this company." The room fell silent. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the air conditioner. Then Alan leaned back, exhaling heavily. "Fine, draft a plan. But this cannot wait. Every hour we stall, the story grows." Back on the streets, ordinary people kept the story alive. College students debated it in cafeterias. Church groups discussed it during Bible study. Mothers texted the video link to daughters, fathers to sons. The phrase, 2 minutes later, "She fired the management," became a kind of shorthand for swift, poetic justice. Not everyone was sympathetic, of course. A handful of voices on talk radio dismissed Marjorie as privileged, arguing she had embarrassed working-class employees. But those voices were drowned out by the tide of solidarity swelling in her favor. By evening, candlelight vigils were organized in front of several Prestige stores across the country, not protests, but quiet gatherings, people holding signs with quotes from Marjorie's speech. Some signs read, "Respect is not a luxury item." Others simply bore her name. Danielle, watching footage of the vigils, turned to her grandmother with tears in her eyes. "Grandma, People are standing in the cold for you. Marjorie reached out and squeezed her granddaughter's hand. Not for me, Danielle. For the truth. For the dignity they recognize in themselves. That night, Marjorie sat by her window, looking out at the city lights. She felt the weight of it pressing in the sudden fame, the public's hunger for her voice. She hadn't asked for this stage, but it had found her. And somewhere deep inside, she knew she couldn't walk away from it now. The next step would not be hers alone. It would belong to the world that had seen her stand tall and had decided it wanted to stand beside her. By the time dawn broke the next day, Regency Group's headquarters in Midtown Manhattan was already swarming with reporters. Vans with satellite dishes lined the curb, and photographers clustered at the revolving glass doors. The video of Marjorie Ellis had dominated every late-night news cycle, and the morning networks were calling it one of the most defining corporate scandals of the year. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. The executive boardroom, normally a place of polished composure, felt like a bunker under siege. The mahogany table gleamed under fluorescent lights, but no one sitting around it looked comfortable. Coffee cups sat untouched, screens glowed with live analytics, and stock tickers flashed ominous red. Alan Whitmore, the company's CEO, stood at the head of the table. His tie loosened, his jaw tight. "We are bleeding," he said flatly, his voice carrying more anger than fear. "Customers are boycotting. Social media is tearing us apart. The stock dropped another 5% overnight. If this continues, we're talking about billions in market value lost." A board member leaned forward. "What about the staff at the boutique? Karen and Brian are already gone. Can't we isolate this? Treat it as a one-off incident." Rebecca Lawson, the regional director who had witnessed the confrontation firsthand, shook her head. Her tone was calm but firm. "This is bigger than Karen and Brian. The public doesn't see two bad apples. They see a culture that tolerated disrespect until Ms. Ellis forced a reckoning. If we don't admit that, we'll lose every shred of credibility." Murmurs spread through the room. Another executive muttered, "But if we acknowledge systemic issues, aren't we opening ourselves to lawsuits?" Rebecca didn't flinch. "If we don't, we're opening ourselves to extinction." Alan ran a hand across his face. "So, what's the plan?" "Rebecca," because at this point, apologies aren't enough. Rebecca leaned forward. "We need Ms. Ellis. She's the voice people trust right now. The public won't believe in our reforms unless she stands with us or at least acknowledges we're listening." The idea seemed absurd to some. Several board members scoffed. "You want us to put the woman who humiliated our staff, who caused this storm, on stage with us? That's insanity." Rebecca met their eyes, one by one. "She didn't cause this storm. We did. And if we're too proud to admit that, then we don't deserve to survive it." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Finally, Alan exhaled. "Set up a press conference this afternoon. If she agrees to attend, fine. If not, we'll move forward without her. But God help us if we mishandle this again." By midday, the company issued a statement announcing a public press conference at 4 p.m. The news spread like wildfire. Speculation filled the airwaves. Would Marjorie appear? Would the company actually take responsibility? Or would this be another corporate smokescreen? At her apartment, Marjorie sat quietly, the morning paper folded neatly on the table before her. Danielle hovered anxiously, phone in hand. "Grandma, they want you at the press conference. Everyone's talking about it. Are you going to go?" Marjorie stirred her tea, her movements deliberate. "This isn't about me, Danielle. It's about truth. If I go, it won't be to save their company. It will be to remind them what they forgot." Danielle's voice softened. "And what's that?" Marjorie looked out the window, her eyes reflecting the city skyline. That dignity is not for sale, that no brand, no store, no title is above respect. At 3:30, a black town car pulled up outside the headquarters. The crowd outside surged as cameras flashed. When Marjorie stepped out, dressed in a simple navy dress and pearl earrings, the noise swelled. Some called her name, others simply clapped. Inside the press hall, executives fidgeted in their seats. Alan adjusted his tie for the 10th time, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Rebecca remained composed, though her heart thudded steadily in her chest. When Marjorie entered, the room shifted. She didn't stride like a celebrity or storm like an activist. She walked with quiet grace, her shoulders square, her gaze calm. She took her seat at the end of the table, not at the center, and folded her hands. Alan began the press conference with the usual platitudes. On behalf of Regency Group, I want to express our deepest regret for the events that took place at our Fifth Avenue boutique. What happened to Ms. Ellis was unacceptable. It does not reflect our values, and we are committed to change. Reporters scribbled, cameras clicked, but the room's energy remained skeptical. Then Alan turned toward Marjorie. Ms. Ellis has graciously agreed to join us today. We believe her perspective is vital in shaping the reforms we need to undertake. The spotlight shifted. Marjorie rose slowly, her voice steady as she addressed the packed hall. I did not come here to shame a company or to bask in attention, she said. I came because what happened to me happens to far too many people whose names you will never know. It is not about luxury. It is not about profit. It is about dignity. She paused, letting the words settle. Yesterday, 2 managers saw an elderly black woman and decided she didn't belong. They were wrong, but the deeper wrong is the culture that allowed their assumptions to fester. That is what must change. Her words cut through the room like clear water over stone. Reporters leaned forward, pens racing. Some executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Marjorie continued, her tone measured yet piercing. Apologies are easy. Change is hard. Change means training not just your staff, but your leaders. Change means auditing not just your sales, but your souls. Change means asking yourselves every day, are we treating people as human beings or as stereotypes? The hall was silent. No shuffling, no whispers, just the weight of her words pressing down. Then she delivered the line that would dominate headlines for days if Regency wants to survive. It must understand this dignity is not an accessory. It is the foundation. Without it, you have nothing worth selling. The room erupted. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and social media lit up with live quotes. Alan looked shaken but forced a nod, knowing the truth in her words. Rebecca sat straighter, pride swelling in her chest. By the time the press conference ended, clips of Marjorie's speech were already viral. Pundits called it a masterclass in moral clarity. Advocacy groups praised her restraint and wisdom. Even skeptical analysts admitted that if Regency followed through, it might not only survive, but transform. That night, Marjorie returned home exhausted but resolute. Danielle hugged her tightly. Grandma, you were incredible. The whole world heard you. Marjorie smiled softly. Then let's hope they were really listening. 2 weeks after the press conference, the Regency Group board reconvened in the same mahogany-lined boardroom. This time, the atmosphere was different. The stock price had stabilized. Customer sentiment was slowly recovering, and advocacy groups were cautiously optimistic. Rebecca Lawson sat at the head of the Reform Committee, her notes spread neatly in front of her. She spoke with quiet authority. The plan is ready, starting immediately. All staff from entry level to executive will undergo mandatory anti-bias and dignity training, facilitated by independent civil rights organizations. Every boutique will be audited quarterly by a third-party oversight body. Complaints will be tracked publicly and progress measured in transparent reports. Some board members shifted nervously at the idea of transparency, but Alan Whitmore nodded. Do it. We can't afford half measures. Not anymore. The resolution passed unanimously. For the first time in decades, Regency wasn't just reacting, it was reforming. Meanwhile, in communities across the country, the ripple effects continued. Churches held forums about dignity in daily life. College students debated the systemic biases revealed by the incident. Grassroots campaigns used the hashtag "Dignity is not an accessory" to highlight stories of ordinary people who had faced quiet humiliations in restaurants, airports, or workplaces. Marjorie Ellis became an unlikely symbol. Invitations flooded in conferences, universities, civic events, but she remained selective. She spoke only where her words could plant seeds of real change. "I'm not here to build a brand," she told one journalist. "I'm here to remind people of their worth." At a televised town hall, she sat on stage beside young activists and seasoned leaders. The moderator asked her, "Ms. Ellis, what lesson should America take from what happened to you?" Marjorie's answer was simple. That silence protects no one. That dignity belongs to everyone. And that we heal not when we deny the wound, but when we face it together. The audience erupted in applause, many rising to their feet. Back at the boutique, changes were tangible. New managers replaced Karen and Brian leaders chosen for empathy as much as efficiency. Lindsay Harper, the young sales associate who had hesitated but later apologized, was retrained and promoted to assistant manager under probation. Derek Collins, the cashier, requested to attend extra workshops, acknowledging his shame and determination to do better. Officer Paul Simmons, the security guard who had chosen empathy over blind obedience, was honored at a company ceremony and given a broader role in training. For customers, the difference was immediate. The air in the boutique felt less heavy, less performative. People noticed. Shoppers whispered that the store felt more human. One Saturday afternoon, Marjorie returned quietly, Danielle by her side. She wasn't there for fanfare. She simply wanted to see the lavender gown again. When she walked in, Lindsay approached with nervous sincerity. "Ms. Ellis, welcome back. It's an honor to have you here." Marjorie smiled warmly. "Thank you. Lindsay, I'm just here for my granddaughter." They found the gown together, still hanging gracefully near the front. Danielle's eyes sparkled as she tried it on, the fabric catching the light. For Marjorie, it was a moment of full circle the dress. Once a symbol of humiliation, now redeemed as a symbol of joy. As they left, Danielle whispered, "Grandma, do you think people will remember all this, or will they forget once the news moves on?" Marjorie paused, looking out at the bustling Fifth Avenue. People forget headlines, child, but they don't forget how they felt. If even one person walks into a store tomorrow and is treated with dignity because of this, then it was worth it. Weeks later, at a national awards dinner, Marjorie was honored with the Humanity in Leadership Award. As she accepted it, she said, "This award is not mine. It belongs to every person who refused to stay silent, to every bystander who spoke up, to every worker who chose courage over complicity. The real legacy is not in awards or applause, but in everyday choices." The room gave her a standing ovation. In the months that followed, other companies took notice. Airlines, banks, hotels, industries scarred by their own scandals began adopting similar oversight programs. Advocacy groups reported a measurable decline in customer discrimination complaints. It wasn't perfection, but it was progress. And for Marjorie, the true reward was quieter still. Sitting on her balcony one summer evening, herbs swaying in the breeze, she watched Danielle write her college essays. The city hummed in the background, but for once, the noise felt like music. Danielle looked up. "Grandma, when I'm older, I want to be like you. Not afraid. Strong, but kind." Marjorie reached over, resting her hand on her granddaughter's. "Then, the world will be better, because you'll carry the lesson forward." That's how change survives one heart at a time. As the sun set over Manhattan, the lights of the city began to twinkle. Marjorie leaned back, her heart steady. The storm had passed, but its echo had left a legacy of dignity, accountability, and hope. And in that legacy, she found peace. The story of Marjorie Ellis teaches us that dignity is not something others grant. It is something we carry within ourselves, even in the face of prejudice and humiliation. Her calm strength turned a moment of injustice into a turning point for an entire company. For older viewers, the lesson resonates even deeper. Our age, our appearance, or how others may judge us do not define our worth. What matters is the quiet authority of self-respect. Marjorie didn't raise her voice or seek revenge. Instead, she showed that restraint and clarity can be more powerful than anger. Her story also reminds us of the importance of choice. Each of us will face moments of unfairness. We can remain silent, or we can stand with dignity for ourselves and for those who come after us. True change often begins with one person's refusal to accept less than respect. In our everyday lives, whether at a store, at work, or even at home, we can practice this lesson to honor our own worth and extend that same dignity to others. In doing so, we leave behind not just memories, but legacies. Thank you for spending your time with us today and sharing in this powerful journey. If Marjorie's story moved you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing stories of dignity, resilience, and hope to light. Together, we can keep these conversations alive and inspire real change.